The last thing I expected, after spending my whole adult life building a boy into a man, was to be walked out of his house like I was a shoplifter. I went from packing his lunch in a small-town kitchen to being escorted past crystal vases and a chandelier, holding one suitcase like it was proof I never belonged. And the strangest part is, I didn't raise him to be cruel. I raised him to be grateful. My name is Margaret, and this is how my stepson tried to erase me, and how the truth he didn't know about came back to rewrite everything. I met Robert in the kind of way people think only happens in movies, but ours started in the least romantic place imaginable, the elementary school's lost and found table. I was a teacher back then, the extra pencils and spare granola bars type, and Ethan, 5 years old, skinny legs swinging under a chair, was waiting in the office because his dad got stuck at work. Robert came in looking tired and apologetic, still in his work boots, holding a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold. He thanked me 3 times in one breath. Ethan peeked around his leg like I was a stranger who might bite. "Ethan," Robert said, soft but firm, "say thank you." Ethan stared at my lanyard, then at my hands, like he was checking if I had anything dangerous in them. "Thank you," he whispered. I crouched to his level and smiled. "You're welcome. Hey, do you like dinosaurs?" His eyes flicked up for the first time. "T-Rex." "I can respect that," I said. "They have commitment." Robert snorted. One of those half laughs people do when they're surprised they're laughing at all. And that was the beginning. We lived in a small town where people still waved from porches, and the grocery store cashier knew your business before you did. Robert was a widower, and I learned that grief doesn't sit in a corner like a quiet guest. It lives in the rooms with you. It shows up in the way a man pauses outside his son's bedroom door, in the way he folds tiny socks like they're fragile, in the way he flinches at certain songs on the radio. When he finally told me about Ethan's mother, it was after we'd been dating months, sitting on my modest little couch with an old crocheted throw blanket my aunt made. He spoke like every word cost him. "I'm not looking for someone to replace her," he said. "I'm looking for someone who can love him. That's all I care about." I didn't say anything dramatic. I just reached over and put my hand on his, because I knew what he was really asking. "I can do that," I told him. "I can love him." When Robert proposed, Ethan stood in the hallway, in a Spider-Man pajama top, watching like he didn't trust the scene to stay happy. I remember turning toward him, ring shaking on my finger, and saying, "Hey, this doesn't take your mom away. Okay? It just means you get another person in your corner." He didn't answer. He just walked up and hugged Robert around the waist, then reached for my hand, like he was testing the temperature of water. The day I married Robert, I married the whole complicated package. The grief, the memories, the little boy who didn't call me anything for almost a year, because every title felt dangerous. I didn't push. I just showed up. I showed up at school plays, with a camcorder balanced on my shoulder. I showed up for science fair projects that looked like they were built in a hurricane. I showed up when he got the flu and threw up on my sleeve and then cried harder because he was embarrassed than because he was sick. One night, when Ethan was 7, he had a nightmare and climbed into our bed shaking. Robert was out cold from a long shift, and Ethan whispered, Am I bad because I forget her face sometimes? My heart cracked so quietly, I swear I felt it, like ice splitting. I pulled him close and said, "No, honey, you're not bad. Your brain is just trying to protect you from hurting all the time." He sniffed. Do you miss people?" "I do," I admitted. "And I still laugh. I still eat pancakes. I still get annoyed when the laundry basket is overflowing." Missing someone doesn't mean you stop living. He was silent for a moment. Then he said the first word that ever made me feel like I'd crossed an invisible bridge. "Okay, Mom." Robert heard it too, because he sat up like he'd been struck by lightning, eyes glossy in the dark. Ethan didn't repeat it again for a while, like he'd gotten brave for 1 second, and then put the bravery away. But it happened. It was real. Back then, I had my own career. I had my own classroom and my own paycheck. I loved teaching, the smell of dry erase markers, and the way a kid's face changes when something finally clicks. But Robert's hours were long, and Ethan needed stability more than he needed my pride. I remember the night I made the decision. It was a Tuesday, because I'd been grading spelling tests, and the clock on the stove said 9:43 p.m. Robert was at the table with a stack of bills spread out like a losing hand of cards. Ethan was asleep, and the house was quiet, except for the old fridge humming. "I can pick up extra shifts," Robert said, rubbing his forehead. "I hate that you're doing so much." "I'm not doing so much," I lied, because women lie like that sometimes. We lie to make the world feel lighter for the people we love. Robert looked at me, and his voice went small. "Marge, I don't want you to give up your life." I set my pen down. "I'm not giving up my life. I'm choosing it." He swallowed hard. "You're sure?" I nodded. "I can tutor on the side. I can go back later. Ethan needs someone home. Not just physically. He needs consistency." Robert's eyes went wet. He hated crying. He hated anything that made him feel like he couldn't protect us. But he reached across the table and squeezed my hand until my fingers tingled. "You're saving us," he whispered. "No," I said, squeezing back. "We're saving each other." That was who we were. A small family held together by choices, not blood. Then, when Ethan was 12, Robert didn't come home. The call came at 6:18 p.m. I remember the exact minute because I stared at the phone screen like numbers could change what I was hearing. There had been an accident on a rainy stretch of highway. It wasn't dramatic like movies. There wasn't time for speeches. There was just gone. I sat on the edge of Ethan's bed that night while he clutched a pillow so tightly his knuckles were white. His face looked older than it should have, like grief pushed him forward in time. "Where do I go?" he asked me, voice flat with shock. "You're home," I told him. "You stay with me. I'm not going anywhere." He stared at the wall, swallowing over and over. "I'm not your real kid." I felt something fierce rise up in me, something that had nothing to do with legality and everything to do with love. "Listen to me," I said, leaning in. "You are my kid, because I say so, because I've been here, because I choose you, and I will keep choosing you." He didn't cry right then. He just nodded once, like he was signing a contract with his soul. After the funeral, the casseroles stopped coming. The sympathy calls got fewer. And the bills didn't care that my husband was dead. So I worked. I worked like the world would swallow us if I slowed down. I took double shifts at a local care facility, the kind with fluorescent lighting that makes everyone look tired. I did weekends. I did nights. I learned what exhaustion tastes like. Metallic, like pennies on your tongue. I'd come home smelling like industrial soap, hands dry and cracked, and still sit at the kitchen table to help Ethan with algebra. When he was 15, he started talking about business school like it was a lifeboat. He watched videos on entrepreneurship, scribbled ideas in cheap spiral notebooks, and asked me questions that sounded too big for our modest little living room. "Do you think people can reinvent themselves?" he asked me once, stirring instant ramen like it was deep philosophy. "Yes," I said, "but it takes work, and it takes character." He nodded like he filed that away. When college acceptance letters came, he got into a great program. Not the most expensive one, thank God, but still more money than we had. He hugged me in the driveway, and I smelled the cheap body spray he'd started wearing. And I thought, I did it. I got him there. Then the MBA conversation came later, after he graduated top of his class and started aiming even higher. By then, he was all sharp suits and ambition, but he still sat at my kitchen table, like the boy who used to spill juice and hide behind Robert's leg. He cleared his throat. "So, I got into the MBA program." I didn't even pretend to be calm. "Ethan, that's incredible." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's expensive." I already knew. I'd looked it up. I'd stared at tuition numbers until they blurred. "I can work and take loans," he said quickly, like he didn't want me to offer anything. I reached across the table and touched his wrist. "We'll do this smart. Together." He hesitated. "You already sacrificed so much." "I sacrificed because I wanted to," I said. "There's a difference." He swallowed. "I don't want you to struggle." I laughed a little, and it came out rough. "Baby, I've been struggling since before you could tie your shoes. That's not new. What's new is that you're giving me something to struggle for." So I sold my jewelry. Not because I had a lot, because I didn't, but I had pieces with stories. The gold bracelet Robert gave me on our first anniversary. A small pearl necklace from my mother. Earrings I wore to every school event. I laid them on the counter one by one, feeling like I was stripping off parts of my past. The pawn shop smelled like old metal and stale carpet. The man behind the counter looked bored until I handed him the bracelet, and then he looked at me like he could tell it mattered. "You sure?" he asked. I pressed my lips together. Yes. I walked out with $2,250 in cash for pieces that held decades of memories. I stood by my car in the parking lot, gripping the envelope until my fingers hurt, telling myself it wasn't loss. It was investment. I took loans, too. I signed papers with terms I barely understood, because when you love someone, you don't always get the luxury of being cautious. I remember one loan was for $18,000 and another for $2,500, and I kept a little notebook where I tracked every payment like it was a heartbeat. Ethan finished his MBA shining like a freshly minted coin. He was top of his class again. He got hired at a major tech company in the city, the kind you see on billboards with slogans about changing the world. He hugged me at his graduation, and for a moment he smelled like nervous sweat and expensive cologne, and he whispered, "I'm going to take care of you." I believed him, not because he owed me, because I thought that's who he was. Over the next 10 years, Ethan rose like a rocket. Promotions, awards, articles written about him like he was some kind of prodigy. When he called, he was always in motion. Margaret, I'm running into a meeting. Ethan, did you eat today? I'll grab something. Ethan, I have to go. I'll call you later. Later became less. The calls got shorter. His visits back to town got rarer. When he did come, he looked around our modest home like it was a museum exhibit from a life he outgrew. But then, at 32 years old, Ethan called me on a Thursday at 7:02 a.m., and his voice sounded like it was buzzing with electricity. I got it, he said. Got what? I asked, still half asleep. The CEO position, he said, and then he laughed. Actually laughed, like the kid who used to run through sprinklers. I'm CEO. I sat up so fast my blanket slid off. Ethan. Oh my God. I did it, he said, breathless. I actually did it. I cried right there in my bed, ugly crying into my pillow. Not because I needed the money or the status, but because I remembered the ramen dinners and the pawn shop and the double shifts and the little boy asking if he was bad for forgetting his mother's face. You did it, I whispered. I'm so proud of you. A month later, he bought a mansion. Not a nice house, a mansion. The kind of place with gates and a driveway that curves like it's showing off. The first time I pulled up in my old car, the security camera at the gate tilted like it was judging me. Ethan met me outside in a fitted suit, smiling wide. You made it! I stepped out, smoothing my thrifted cardigan, suddenly aware of how small I felt next to the stone columns and tall windows. This is Ethan, I breathed. This is huge. He waved a hand like it was nothing. Come on, it's home. Home. He used that word like he meant it. Inside, everything echoed. My footsteps clicked on polished floors. There was a smell of lemony cleaner and new leather. A bowl of shiny green apples sat on a marble island, like a decoration, not food. Ethan walked me around like a proud tour guide. This is the office. This is the gym. This is the wine room. Don't worry, I don't even drink that much. I followed, trying not to look overwhelmed. But at one point I turned too fast, and my purse snagged on the corner of an end table. A tiny decorative sculpture wobbled. I lunged to catch it and knocked my elbow into a lamp. The lamp didn't fall, but the sound was loud in the open space. Ethan froze, then started laughing so hard he had to bend over. Oh my God, he wheezed. You almost took out the whole decor budget. My face burned. I'm not used to living in a museum. He wiped his eyes. You're adorable. I didn't love that word, but I told myself it was affection. He insisted I move in. He didn't ask like it was optional. He made it sound like an obvious next step. You're not staying in that little house alone, he said. Not after everything. You're coming here. I have plenty of room. Ethan, I protested, this is your life, your space. It's our space, he said, and he looked at me in a way that made my chest ache. You're my family. For the first few months, it felt almost like a dream. I cooked again, though the kitchen was so fancy I had to Google how to work the oven. I planted herbs in little pots by the window. I folded Ethan's laundry, even though he had staff, because some habits are love languages. You don't know how to stop speaking. He'd come home late and loosen his tie, leaning against the counter while I poured him tea. You don't have to do that, he'd say. I want to, I'd reply. Sometimes we'd sit at the island and talk, and for a while I could see the boy he used to be. Then Vanessa appeared. Ethan mentioned her at first, like she was just another part of his busy life. I met someone. Then She's incredible. Then, I think this is serious. When I met her, it was at a restaurant that had cloth napkins folded like swans. Vanessa swept in wearing a dress that looked poured onto her. Her hair was glossy, her smile sharp, and her eyes did that quick scan thing, from my sensible shoes to my simple earrings, like she was checking for stains. She kissed Ethan's cheek, then looked at me and extended 2 fingers to shake, barely touching my hand. "So you're Margaret," she said, like my name was something she found in a drawer. "I am," I said warmly. "It's lovely to meet you." Her smile tightened. "Ethan's told me so much." Ethan beamed. "Vanessa, she basically raised me." Vanessa's eyes flicked to Ethan. "Basically," she echoed, light as air. Dinner was polite, in the way a knife is polite. Vanessa asked questions that sounded innocent until you heard the edge. "How long did you teach?" she asked. "I left teaching when Ethan was little," I said, "to be home more." "Oh," she said, and sipped her wine. "So you didn't really build a career." I felt my face warm, but I kept my voice even. "I built a family." Vanessa's laugh was small. "That's one way to put it." Ethan didn't correct her. He just kept talking about the company, about expansion plans, about the next decade, like it was a game he was winning. When they got engaged, Ethan called me into the living room, where a massive painting hung that I still didn't understand. He held up Vanessa's hand like a trophy. The ring sparkled so bright it looked unreal. "She said yes," he announced. I clapped my hands to my mouth. Oh my goodness. Ethan. Vanessa smiled at me like she was doing me a favor. I hugged Ethan, feeling his shoulders stiffen under my arms, like he wasn't used to being held anymore. Then I turned to Vanessa. "Congratulations," I said. "I hope you know what a good man he is." Vanessa leaned in close enough that I could smell her perfume, something expensive and floral with a cold undertone. "I do," she said softly, "and I hope you know what kind of woman I am." I didn't understand what she meant until the 5 days that changed everything. Day 1 was a Monday. I remember because I'd made oatmeal and sliced bananas into it the way Ethan liked when he was little, and I was humming without thinking. Vanessa walked into the kitchen in a silk robe, like she owned the air. "Margaret," she said, tapping her nails against her phone, "we need to rearrange some things." "Of course," I said. "What do you need?" She smiled, and it didn't touch her eyes. "Ethan and I talked. We want the upstairs rooms for our future, our privacy." I blinked. "Okay, I'm happy to move to one of the guest rooms." Vanessa tilted her head. "The guest rooms are for guests." Ethan walked in then, adjusting his cufflinks, not looking at me. "Hey, Vanessa's right. It'll be better if you take the basement room for now." The word basement landed like a slap dressed up in velvet. "The basement?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice from cracking. "It's nice," Ethan said quickly, finally meeting my eyes for half a second. "It's renovated. It's basically like a suite." Vanessa watched my face like she was waiting for entertainment. I swallowed. "If that's what you want." So I packed up my things. In silence. I carried my small box of photos. Robert's photo in a simple frame. Ethan's kindergarten picture with missing teeth. My teaching certificate I couldn't bring myself to throw away. I carried my old quilt. I carried my dignity, like it was fragile glass. The basement room was cold in a way the rest of the house never was. The air smelled faintly like paint and unused space. The bed was perfectly made, like a hotel, There was one small window near the ceiling that let in a strip of daylight, and I stared at it that first night, wondering how fast a life can shrink. Day 2 was Tuesday. I came upstairs at 6:30 p.m. because I'd made chicken pot pie. My hands remembered the recipe without needing to think. And I heard laughter from the dining room. Real laughter. The kind that used to mean family. I stepped toward the doorway, holding the casserole dish with oven mitts. Vanessa turned and looked at me like I'd walked into the wrong meeting. "Oh," she said, "we're having a family dinner." I hesitated. "Yes, I made—" Ethan appeared behind her, tie loosened, cheeks slightly flushed from wine. He looked at the casserole dish like it was an awkward prop. Vanessa's voice was honeyed. "Margaret, it's just, these dinners are important for bonding. For us." I waited for Ethan to say, "Of course you're joining." I waited for him to remember who taught him manners. He didn't. He cleared his throat. "Maybe you can eat later. Downstairs. It's fine." There was a silence then, an awkward, stretching silence, where I could hear the faint clink of silverware, the hum of the air conditioner, my own heartbeat in my ears. I stood there with the dish getting heavier in my hands, and no one moved to help. I nodded once. "Of course." I turned around carefully, because I refused to let them see me stumble, and I carried the pot pie back down to the basement like I was carrying my own humiliation. I ate alone at the small desk in my room, the crust soggy from sitting too long, and I told myself not to cry. I told myself it was temporary. People get weird before weddings. Stress does things. Day 3 was Wednesday. I was folding towels so plush they felt like something you weren't supposed to actually use, when I heard Vanessa's heels clicking above me like punctuation. She came down to the basement doorway and leaned against the frame. "We need to talk," she said. I set the towels down. "Okay." She looked around the room with disgust, like even the air down here offended her. "This arrangement isn't sustainable." "I'm trying to stay out of the way," I said carefully. "I don't want to cause—" Ethan's voice cut in from behind her. "You are causing it." He stepped into the doorway, and I barely recognized him. His posture was rigid, his jaw tight, like he'd rehearsed anger in a mirror. I stood up slowly. "Ethan, what's going on?" He exhaled hard through his nose, like I was a problem that wouldn't solve itself. "Vanessa says you've been hovering, making things uncomfortable." "I've been downstairs," I said, genuinely confused. "I've barely seen you." Vanessa crossed her arms. "Your presence is uncomfortable. The way you talk, the way you dress, it's embarrassing." The word hit, but I kept my face still. "I'm sorry you feel that way." Ethan's eyes flashed like he was trying to convince himself of something. He said it like a verdict, like a door slamming. "Just a stepmother." For a second, the room went too quiet, like the house itself paused to listen. I felt my throat tighten. I tasted something bitter, like old coffee. I wanted to say 1,000 things about late nights, about loans, about selling my jewelry, about sitting on his bed when his world fell apart. But I saw Vanessa watching him, watching me, and I realized this wasn't a conversation. It was a performance. So I did the only thing I could do without breaking. I nodded. "Okay." Day 4 was Thursday. I came back from the grocery store with 2 bags, bread, apples, a jar of peanut butter, because it was on sale, when I found an envelope taped to the basement door. White. official looking. My name typed neatly on the front. My hands shook as I peeled it off. Inside was an eviction notice, not a suggestion, not a conversation, a notice. I read it sitting on the edge of the bed, the paper trembling in my grip. My vision blurred, and I blinked hard until the words came back into focus. It said I had to vacate. It had language about trespassing and removal, like I was some stranger who'd slipped in. I went upstairs holding the paper like evidence. Vanessa was in the living room scrolling on her phone, legs crossed like she didn't have a care in the world. "Vanessa," I said, voice quiet. "What is this?" She glanced at it. "Oh, that. Yes." My mouth went dry. "Did Ethan agree to this?" She smiled without warmth. "Ethan agrees with me." Ethan walked in then, and for a moment I felt a ridiculous surge of hope. Surely he would be shocked. Surely he would say, "No, that's not happening." He looked at the paper, then at Vanessa, then at me, and he sighed, like I was exhausting him. "Margaret," he said, "it's time. You'll land on your feet. You always do." I stared at him. "You're throwing me out." Vanessa stood up, smoothing her dress. "We're setting boundaries." I couldn't breathe properly. The house felt too big, too bright, like I was trapped under lights. "I don't have anywhere to go," I said, and I hated how small my voice sounded. Ethan's eyes flickered, but he didn't step forward. "You can find somewhere. A hotel? A friend." I thought of my small town hours away. I thought of my old house, which I'd rented out because Ethan insisted I move in, and said, "You won't need it anymore." I thought of my bank account, which was never meant for emergencies like this. My hands tightened around the paper until it crinkled. "Okay," I said again, because it was all I could manage without shattering. Day 5 was Friday. It was 9:11 a.m. because I looked at the clock on the microwave as I zipped my suitcase. One suitcase. That's what I was allowed. That's what my whole life in that house was worth. I folded my clothes carefully, not because I had to, but because control was the only thing left. I tucked Robert's photo frame between 2 sweaters. I packed my toiletry bag. I held my old quilt for a moment, then left it folded on the bed because it suddenly felt too painful to carry. When I walked upstairs with my suitcase, 2 security guards were waiting by the front door. Big men in black uniforms with polite, blank expressions like this was routine. Vanessa stood near the staircase, arms folded, chin lifted. Ethan was by the door, hands in his pockets, staring at the floor like if he didn't look at me, it wasn't real. One of the guards nodded at me. "Ma'am," I swallowed. "I'm going." Vanessa's voice cut in, crisp. "Make sure she doesn't take anything that isn't hers." The guard looked uncomfortable, but he didn't respond. I looked at Ethan then. Really looked. "This is what you want?" He finally met my eyes, and for a split second I saw something. Shame, maybe. Fear. But it vanished under whatever Vanessa had poured into him. "It's complicated," he said. I nodded once because I refused to beg. "Okay." I stepped outside. The morning air was cool and smelled like freshly cut grass. Somewhere, a sprinkler hissed softly, watering landscaping I'd never touched. I heard the front door close behind me, and it sounded like the end of a chapter. One of the guards walked me to the end of the driveway. Not roughly, not cruelly, just firmly. I got into my car, hands shaking on the steering wheel, and I drove until the mansion disappeared in the mirror. I ended up at a homeless shelter that night. The words felt unreal in my head. homeless shelter, like they belonged to someone else's story. But the shelter was real. The fluorescent lights, the smell of disinfectant, the rows of metal-framed beds. The intake worker handed me a thin blanket and a small bar of soap, like I was checking into the saddest hotel on earth. "What's your name?" she asked, pen poised. "Margaret," I said. She looked up briefly, eyes softening. "You have family?" I thought of Ethan's face when he said it was complicated. I thought of Vanessa's smile. I thought of the security guards. "I did," I said. "That first night, I'd lay on the narrow bed staring at the ceiling tiles. A woman on the bed across from me coughed in her sleep. Someone whispered in the hallway. My suitcase sat by my feet like a loyal dog. I pressed my hand over my chest and tried to breathe through the ache. I wanted to call Ethan and scream. I wanted to call the media and tell them what their shiny young CEO did to the woman who raised him. I wanted to throw my grief at the world like a brick. But I didn't. Because even after everything, I couldn't bear the idea of becoming someone bitter and loud, just to prove I was hurt. A few days later, on a Tuesday afternoon, I was sitting at a plastic table in the shelter common room, peeling an orange slowly, because it gave my hands something to do. The TV in the corner played a daytime talk show. No one was really watching. A voice behind me said my name like it was a memory. "Margaret?" I turned, and there was Dorothy. Dorothy and I had taught together years ago. She was the kind of friend who brought you coffee without asking, and told you hard truths without flinching. Her hair had gone more silver, but her eyes were the same, sharp, kind, unmissable. "Dorothy," I breathed, and before I could stop myself, my eyes filled. She didn't ask questions right away. She just walked over and wrapped her arms around me so firmly I felt my ribs press. "Oh, honey," she murmured, "what happened to you?" I pulled back, wiping my face quickly, because I didn't want to cry in public. "It's a long story." Dorothy looked around the shelter, jaw tightening. "Yeah, I can see that." She sat across from me. "Start wherever you can." I hesitated. My pride fought with my exhaustion. Then the words started coming out like water from a cracked pipe. Small town. Robert. Raising Ethan. Double shifts. MBA. Mansion. Vanessa. Basement. Eviction notice. Suitcase. Dorothy's hands curled into fists on the table. "They did what?" "I don't want to talk about them like they're monsters," I said quickly, because my heart still defended Ethan out of habit. "I don't want to." Dorothy leaned in. "Margaret, look at me. You can love someone and still tell the truth about what they did." I swallowed hard, staring at the orange peel in my hand. I don't want to be public. I don't want to be some sad story people point at." Dorothy's eyes softened. "Okay." The funny thing is, I thought that was the end of it. I didn't know Dorothy had quietly turned her phone over on the table, screen down, voice recorder running. I didn't know she was collecting my pain like evidence, not for revenge, but for protection. That night, Dorothy didn't let me stay at the shelter again. She practically dragged me out, and I didn't resist because I was too tired to argue. "You're coming with me," she said. "I have a guest room. It's not a mansion, but it's clean and it's safe." In Dorothy's car, I held my suitcase in my lap like it was a shield. The air freshener smelled like vanilla. It made me think of baking cookies when Ethan was little, and my throat tightened again. At Dorothy's house, she gave me a fluffy towel and let me shower as long as I wanted. When I came out in borrowed pajamas, she'd made grilled cheese and tomato soup like we were in college again. I sat at her kitchen table, steam rising from the bowl, and for the first time in days, I felt like I might survive. Dorothy watched me eat, then said carefully, "Have you heard from Ethan?" I shook my head. "No." Then my phone buzzed, like the universe had been waiting for that moment. A message from Ethan. My hands trembled as I opened it. Dorothy stayed silent, eyes fixed on my face. Their message said, "Margaret, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Vanessa is under a lot of stress. I'll help you find a prevents any drama solution." I stared at the words until my eyes blurred. Dorothy's voice was low. "What did he just say to you?" I swallowed. "He thinks I'm drama." Dorothy leaned back, disbelief on her face. "After everything you did." I looked down at my soup. "He's influenced. He's—" Dorothy cut me off gently but firmly. "He's 32. He's not a child." The next few weeks were a strange limbo. I stayed at Dorothy's, and I tried to be useful. I washed dishes. I made her bed. I offered to pay rent, and she refused so hard her eyebrows nearly flew off her forehead. "You paid enough," she said. I applied for jobs quietly. I updated an old resume that felt like it belonged to another lifetime. I looked at small apartments online, doing math that never quite worked. Some nights I sat on Dorothy's guest bed and stared at my suitcase, still half packed, like my life didn't deserve to unpack. One afternoon, I went to a thrift store to buy a few basics, because wearing borrowed clothes forever felt like another kind of humiliation. I was standing in the aisle holding two sweaters, one soft green, one scratchy gray, when I heard my own voice in my head telling Ethan to be kind. Tell the truth. Do the right thing even when it's hard. I paid $14.67 for the sweaters, and as I dug for change, I dropped coins all over the counter. They scattered and rolled, and I crouched to pick them up, bumping my forehead on the edge of the register. The cashier winced. "Ma'am, you okay?" I laughed, because it was either laugh or cry. "Apparently, I'm trying to sue the counter for assault." She smiled, and for a second, the world felt normal. Then, the twist came. Not from Ethan, not from Vanessa. From a man in a suit who showed up at Dorothy's door on a rainy Wednesday morning. Dorothy opened the door, and I heard a polite voice say, "I'm looking for Margaret." I stepped into the hallway, wiping my hands on a dish towel. The man turned toward me. He was in his 60s, neat gray hair, briefcase held like an extension of his arm. His eyes were kind but serious. "Margaret?" he asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. "Who are you?" He offered a business card. "Mr. Patterson. I was Robert's attorney." My knees almost gave out. Robert's name felt like a ghost walking into the room. Dorothy's eyes widened. "Robert's attorney?" Mr. Patterson nodded. "May I come in? We need to speak privately." Dorothy looked at me, and I nodded. She stepped aside. Mr. Patterson sat at Dorothy's kitchen table, set his briefcase down, and opened it with the calm precision of someone used to delivering life-altering information. He pulled out a thick envelope and a file folder. "I've been trying to find you," he said. "I'm sorry it took so long." I gripped the edge of the chair. "Why are you looking for me?" He took a breath. "Robert left a will." I stared at him. I thought everything would have gone to Ethan. Ethan was his son." "It's more complicated," Mr. Patterson said. and his gaze stayed steady on mine. Robert anticipated certain possibilities. He created a trust. My skin went cold. A trust? Mr. Patterson slid a document toward me. He placed company shares in your name as trustee. 40%. For a moment, I couldn't process the number. 40%. It sounded like a fraction from a math problem, not something tied to my life. I swallowed. Ethan's company? Mr. Patterson nodded once. Yes. Robert acquired a significant stake early on. He believed in Ethan, and he invested heavily while Ethan was still rising. But he structured it so you would hold the shares as trustee, with conditions about stewardship. Dorothy made a small sound, like she was trying not to explode. My fingers hovered over the paper, but didn't touch it. Ethan doesn't know? He knows Robert invested, Mr. Patterson said carefully. But based on what I've seen, he does not understand the trust structure. The shares are in your name, as trustee. Legally. My mouth went dry. Why would Robert do that? Mr. Patterson opened the envelope and pulled out a letter. The paper slightly yellowed at the edges, like it had been waiting in the dark for years. He left you this, he said. My hand shook as I took it. The handwriting on the outside said, Margaret, in Robert's familiar slant. I hadn't seen his handwriting in so long, it felt like hearing his voice. I held the letter to my chest for 1 second, eyes closed, breathing in, like I could inhale the past. Then I opened it. Robert's words were simple. He wrote about love, about trust, about fear. He wrote that he knew Ethan could become successful, but he also worried success could swallow his humility. He wrote that he wanted to protect me, not just financially, but with leverage, with proof that my sacrifice mattered. He wrote, if Ethan ever forgets who stood by him, I want you to have the power to stand by yourself. Tears slid down my face, silent and hot. Dorothy reached across the table and held my hand. Mr. Patterson waited, respectful, like he understood grief needs room. When I finally looked up, my voice came out cracked. What does this mean? Mr. Patterson folded his hands. It means you are not powerless. It means you have legal ownership of a major stake. It means you have rights, and the board will have to acknowledge them. Dorothy's eyes were blazing. So Ethan kicked you out while you legally own nearly half his company? Mr. Patterson's expression tightened. If the trust is activated under certain conditions, yes. And given what you've told me, given that you were evicted, there are legal mechanisms we need to discuss. I stared at Robert's letter again. My chest felt full and hollow at the same time. Dorothy whispered, almost to herself, Karma has a calendar. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt nauseous. Because the truth was, I didn't want to destroy Ethan. I wanted my son back, the boy who called me Mom in the dark. But I also remembered the basement, the eviction notice, the security guards, the way Ethan stood there and let it happen. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat. There's another issue. What? I asked. He hesitated. Your situation became public. Dorothy went still. Mr. Patterson looked at her. Someone recorded a conversation, a personal account. It's circulating. Dorothy's face drained of color. I turned to her slowly. Dorothy? She opened her mouth, closed it, then exhaled shakily. Margaret, I didn't do it to hurt you. I did it because I knew no one would believe you if you ever had to defend yourself. I felt a wave of emotion, anger, gratitude, betrayal, relief, all tangled together. "You recorded me?" I asked quietly. Dorothy's eyes filled. "I'm sorry. I was so furious. And I thought, if he's going to treat you like you're disposable, then the world should know who he really is." I looked down at Robert's letter, then back at Dorothy. I didn't have the energy to fight her. Not then. Mr. Patterson spoke carefully. "The media has picked it up. The story has traction. An ungrateful CEO. A stepmother who sacrificed everything. Investors are sensitive to reputation." I sat back, stunned, like my life had been thrown onto a stage without my permission. My phone buzzed again, like it could sense the chaos. This time, it was Vanessa. Their message said, "You need to stop this. Ethan's name is being dragged. If you care about him at all, you'll keep quiet." I stared at the screen until my fingers went numb. Dorothy leaned forward, voice shaking with anger. "She's threatening you." "It's not a threat," I murmured. "It's guilt." Mr. Patterson held up one hand. "Margaret, you don't have to respond to anyone right now. What you need is a plan. A lawful one. A clean one. You have legal standing. We proceed carefully." So I did what I've always done. I steadied myself. I listened. I chose dignity, even when my insides were screaming. Mr. Patterson laid out the lawful steps like a map. We verified the trust documents. We confirmed the share registration. We prepared formal notices. We requested a board meeting. We didn't leak anything new. We didn't make threats. We let the truth and the paperwork do what truth and paperwork do when they're solid. They corner lies. Over the next week, Ethan's face started showing up in places I never expected. News clips on Dorothy's TV, headlines online, commentators shaking their heads. I watched a video of Ethan leaving his office building, jaw clenched, reporters calling his name. "Ethan, is it true you evicted your stepmother?" He didn't answer. He shoved into a car like silence could erase reality. The board demanded answers. Investors started pulling out. The company's stock dipped. People who'd once praised him now spoke about leadership integrity, like it was a knife they could twist. Vanessa, who loved power when it was stable, suddenly looked like she'd tasted something sour. And then she did what women like Vanessa do when the wind shifts. She left. I didn't witness it in person, but I heard it from the same media frenzy that had swallowed my life. Photos of her stepping out at a gala with another man. Older, richer, the kind of man whose watch costs more than my old car. Articles framed it as moving on and new beginnings. All I saw was a rat leaving a sinking ship. Then came the confrontation I'd been dreading. Mr. Patterson arranged for me to attend the board meeting remotely at first, but I refused. Not because I wanted drama, because I wanted to look Ethan in the eye, like the woman who raised him, not like a ghost in the background. The meeting was on a Monday at 10 a.m. in a glass conference room at Ethan's headquarters. The city outside looked bright and indifferent. Inside, everything smelled like espresso and expensive cologne. I wore my best navy blazer, the one I used to wear for parent-teacher conferences. My hands were steady, but my stomach churned. Mr. Patterson walked beside me, calm as granite. Ethan was already there when I entered. He stood up so quickly his chair scraped. He'd looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but in presence. Like the armor of success had cracked, and something scared was underneath. Board members sat around the table, faces stern. A few glanced at me with curiosity, some with sympathy, some with calculation. A couple of executives lingered near the wall, pretending not to stare. Ethan's eyes locked on mine. Margaret. I didn't answer immediately. I sat down at the far end of the table, placed my hands neatly on the surface, and waited. The board chair, a woman with silver hair and a voice that could freeze water, spoke first. Margaret, thank you for coming. I nodded. Thank you for having me. She turned to Ethan. Ethan, we need clarity. We've received legal documentation indicating Margaret is trustee and owner of 40% of company shares. Ethan's face drained of color. No, that can't be right. Mr. Patterson slid the documents across the table. It is correct. Ethan stared at the papers like they were written in another language. Why would Dad? The board chair's voice sharpened. We also need an explanation for the eviction allegation. The reputational damage is severe. Investors are pulling out. Partners are pausing deals. One of the board members, a man with a red tie, leaned forward. People don't invest in numbers alone. They invest in leadership. Right now, leadership looks questionable. Ethan's gaze snapped to me, wild. Why didn't you tell me? A hot laugh almost escaped me, but I swallowed it down. I didn't know. His mouth opened, then closed. The room held another awkward silence, thick and uncomfortable, as everyone watched a family tragedy dressed in corporate clothing. Ethan's voice cracked. Margaret, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I looked at him, really looked. It went exactly as far as you pushed it. He flinched. The board chair tapped the table lightly. Ethan, given the current situation, we need to discuss your position. Ethan's head snapped towards her. My position? She didn't blink. CEO, the company cannot hemorrhage trust. We have fiduciary responsibility. Ethan's breath came fast. You can't do that. A board member spoke calmly. We can. And we will, if necessary. Ethan looked around the room like he expected someone to rescue him. Vanessa wasn't there. The people who once laughed at his jokes and praised his vision sat stiff with distance. Power, I realized, is loyal only to itself. When the board moved into formal motions and votes, I felt numb, not satisfied, not gleeful, just hollow. Because no matter what Ethan had done, this was still the boy I once held during nightmares. But my compassion didn't erase consequences. It just made them sadder. By noon, it was done. Ethan lost his CEO position. The board's decision wasn't theatrical. It was clinical, lawful, witnessed by every person in that room, and later by the world. Outside the building afterward, reporters clustered like birds. Cameras turned. Voices called out. Mr. Patterson guided me toward a side exit, but Ethan caught up to me in the corridor, breathing hard. Margaret, please, he said. And it didn't sound like CEO Ethan. It sounded like 12-year-old Ethan standing in his bedroom, asking where he would go. I stopped walking. Mr. Patterson paused a few steps away, giving space without leaving me alone. Ethan's eyes were bloodshot. She left me. Vanessa. She's with someone else already. I didn't react. Not because I didn't feel anything, but because his pain didn't rewrite mine. He swallowed hard. I didn't understand what I was doing. I thought you were just, I don't know, always there. I didn't think you could be gone. I held his gaze. My voice came out quiet, even. Blood doesn't define family. Ethan's face crumpled like that sentence punched through whatever excuses he'd built. I'm sorry, he choked. I'm so sorry. Please, I'll fix it. I'll buy you a house. Anything. I watched him for a long moment. And the strange thing was, I believed he meant it right then. I believed he was terrified and ashamed and trying to grab back the version of his life where consequences didn't exist. But I also knew something else. If I let him pull me back in with panic and money, I would teach him the worst lesson of all, that he could break people and still get comfort. So I didn't yell. I didn't slap him. I didn't perform pain for the hallway. I simply said, "You already showed me what you're capable of." He shook his head desperately. "That's not me. It became you," I said. He reached out like he wanted to touch my arm, then stopped himself at the last second, like he finally remembered boundaries now that they hurt him. "Please," he whispered, "don't leave me." And that's when I realized the final cruelty. He didn't understand he'd already left me. He'd left me on day 1 when he let Vanessa move me to the basement. He'd left me on day 2 when he told me to eat alone. He'd left me on day 4 when he let an eviction notice be taped to my door. He'd left me on day 5 when security escorted me out with one suitcase. I exhaled slowly. "I'm not your punishment," I told him. "Your choices are." His shoulders shook. "What do you want from me?" I thought of Robert's letter. I thought of the shelter beds. I thought of the women there who had no secret trust waiting to save them. "I want you to become someone you can live with," I said. "But you're not going to become that by buying me back." Mr. Patterson stepped forward then, clearing his throat gently. "Margaret." "The car is waiting," Ethan's eyes pleaded. "Margaret." I looked at him one last time, and my voice didn't waver. "Goodbye, Ethan." I walked away. Option B was the choice I made, not because I hated him, but because I loved myself enough to stop being collateral damage. I took my shares, legally, cleanly. Mr. Patterson handled the paperwork like a surgeon. No emotion, all precision. The foundation came next. I started a foundation in Robert's name. I named it after him because the man who loved me didn't just show up in life. He showed up beyond it. With protection, he planned quietly, while the rest of us were just trying to get through the day. The foundation focused on homeless mothers, because once you've sat under fluorescent lights with a thin blanket and listened to someone cry quietly in the next bed, you stop seeing homelessness as a statistic. You start seeing it as 1,000 small tragedies stacked on top of each other until someone can't climb out. I funded transitional housing programs. I funded child care stipends. I funded job training. I made sure women could get bus passes and interview clothes and help with security deposits. Practical things, the kind of things that change lives without needing a spotlight. The first check I wrote was for $25,000 to the shelter I stayed in. My hand shook as I signed it, not because it was hard, but because it felt like taking pain and turning it into something solid. Dorothy came with me when I delivered it. She stood beside me in the shelter office while the director stared at the number like she couldn't trust her eyes. This is real?" the director whispered. I nodded. "It's real." Dorothy's eyes were shiny. "She's real," she said, like she needed the world to understand that. The media tried to follow my story, but I kept my boundaries. I didn't do flashy interviews. I didn't sit under studio lights and cry on cue. Mr. Patterson helped me release a single statement about the Foundation's mission, and then I went quiet. I didn't want fame. I wanted peace. Ethan tried to contact me for months. Calls, emails. Messages that swung between guilt and desperation. Sometimes he sounded like the boy I raised, and sometimes he sounded like a man who missed the power he lost more than the people he hurt. I didn't respond. Not because he didn't deserve a chance to change. He did. People can change. But because I didn't owe him front row access to my healing. I moved into a small, comfortable home not far from Dorothy. Nothing fancy. A little porch, a small garden, a kitchen that felt like mine. The first night there, I unpacked my suitcase fully, folded my clothes into drawers, and set Robert's framed photo on a shelf where morning light touched it. I made tea and sat at my own table, listening to the quiet. Not the hollow quiet of abandonment, but the gentle quiet of safety. Sometimes I still think about Ethan. I think about the good moments, because they were real too. I think about the day he called me Mom. I think about his graduation hug. I think about the promise he made to take care of me. And then I think about the 5 days that revealed who he became when someone wealthy and arrogant told him love was embarrassing. My life didn't end when I walked out of that mansion with one suitcase. It started again, smaller, calmer, truer. And karma didn't need my anger to do its job. It just needed the truth, written down years ago by a man who loved me enough to plan for the day I might need saving, from the very child we raised together.